Thank you, Senator. All good information to have. I'm going to try and keep this train moving a little faster here. We do have Senator Mitchell, and I also just want to credit Senator Carol Liu for her many years of advocacy and authoring of bills that would create an earned income tax credit. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that if the administration stated, as they suggested by their comment, that their stated goal is to lift families out of deep poverty, the UCLA fiscal forecast report of several years ago suggests that an infusion of $3,000 a year into the lowest income earners in California is what lifts one out of deep poverty. It's clear that the vast minority of the families would qualify for this, would qualify at that $2,000 level. There would be families with multiple dependents, and we know, based on the CalWORKS population, the average family size is 2 children plus 1 or 2 parents. And so when we look across the spectrum, the number of people who would qualify for that median is probably closer to it, and it won't lift anyone out of deep poverty. Number 2, I'm curious, you mentioned that there were 16 franchise tax board FTEs that would be put in place for the outreach. Could you give me the total number of franchise tax board FTEs that are included in the proposal to make this new program happen?
There are 98 positions. That includes temporary help and $22 million in administrative costs. And that's just for the first year, because some of the changes for implementing the program will be built into their information technology system that's called EDR. And those are increased costs in the first year that will go away after that initial investment.
And are you basing those FTEs in the first year on any guesstimate on what your take-up rate will be in the first year? How did you come up with 98?
Yeah, that rate's actually based on an assumption of 825,000 taxpayers that would be impacted.
So you're assuming that everyone who's eligible will file in year 1?
No, what we are assuming is that the take-up rate will be comparable to what we have on the federal EITC.
In the 70% range of a population that doesn't pay taxes. Okay, thank you. I mean, doesn't pay taxes, a population that doesn't file. And we're assuming the same take-up rate as the federal EITC.
And let me just clarify that some of those do in fact file because they're having their wages withheld during the year.
Got it.
And they're filing to get the refund.
So it depends on the nature of their work.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Senator Woke. Yes, we're ready.
Ready for a motion, but I would just like to make a very brief comment. First, I think it's great that the governor's done this. I think it's long overdue, and it will get to the people who actually can use it, unlike the movie tax credit, which will get to lots of people who won't use it or don't even need it, and it's extremely ineffective, as all that we did last year for multi-millions of dollars. So with that, I would like to move that the recommendation is to adopt the placeholder trailer bill language for the May revised proposals for the EITC, and the supplemental report language to be refined through the remainder of the budget process, and approve the accompanying budget proposal for the Franchise Tax Board to administer the credit.
Thank you, Senator Woke. So we do have a motion before us. Call the roll, please.
Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Nielsen?
No. Yes.
Nielsen, no. Allen? Anderson? Anderson, no. Bell? Bell, aye. Block? Block, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Mitchell? Monning? Morlock? Morlock, no. Wynn? Aye. Wynn, aye. Pan? Aye. Pan, aye. Pavley? Pavley, aye. Roth? Aye. Roth, aye. Stone? Woke?
Aye.
Woke, aye. That's 9-3.
Nielsen, no to aye.
Nielsen is no to aye.
Nielsen, no to aye. That's 10-1. Stone, no to aye. That's 11-2.
11-1?
Yes.
11-1, the motion passes. All right, we're getting a little giddy here. That means we're toward the end. Issue 15, local property taxes, page 19. Of course.
Could we just make a motion on these? These are basically budget assumptions.
Before we get there, colleagues, we're going to get this done as quickly as possible. Bear with me, please. Before we get to issue 15, I'm going to ask that we take up Senator Wynn's bill, should not take long, SB 353. Sure. You can stay here. You can stay here. Sure, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to present this. I understand we have a lot to do. I mean, actually a little more, but I'm going to make this really quick. SB 353 seeks to support local government partners and frontline law enforcement agency that have been severely impacted by the 2011 Prison Realignment Bill, AB 109. The state shifted responsibility for managing and housing felons to counties, which according to the administration supporters of AB 109 is supposed to save the state more than $30 billion over 10 years. That is more than $3 billion annually that would otherwise be spent to manage these felons in state prisons and in state parole programs. While the state is enjoying a new revenue windfall with $13 billion more than was expected from last year's budget was enacted, none of that new money has been used to increase the local services needed to help local government in regards to AB 109. So our local public safety partners needs to be able to provide more mental health services, job training, education, drug treatment, as well as supervision and management. Prior to realignment, county jails had a combined capacity of 76,000 beds, and 17 counties faced court orders to limit their jail population. More than 150,000 offenders have since been shifted to local government for our responsibility. Local jails cannot handle the burden, and local sheriffs, rather than the courts, are faced with determining which convicted criminals to release. Under SB 353, counties will have additional funds to address these issues. The funds are flexible, allowing each county to address the public safety needs most critical to its residents. SB 353 requires the LAO and the Department of Finance to develop a yearly estimate of the state savings and cost avoidances expected to result from realignment. Counties will receive funds based on the average daily population of realigned offenders under each county's supervision. This bill has no opposition and has received support from Crimes Victims United, the Peace Officers Research Associations, police chiefs from the state of Santa Ana, amongst other, the County of Orange. I would appreciate your consideration of support for SB 353 to keep the state's 4-year-old promise of investing local governments to provide the best programs possible for those criminals that are ready to become productive citizens.
Thank you, Senator Wynn. Ms. Bosler, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, 2011 realignment was a major and very important proposal that was put forward and adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor. As part of that, and following up in the next year, Proposition 30 was passed. This was a constitutional amendment that specifically dedicated monies to various purposes, but one of them to local governments, specifically related to 2011 realignment. The budget year, there's $2.5 billion dedicated to all of the public safety programs that were funded by Proposition 30, and the revenues dedicated by Proposition 30. Including $1.2 billion specifically for the community corrections subaccount, which is known as AB 109, the AB 109 programs. I would also like to note that with the dissolution of redevelopment, $4.2 billion in property taxes have been returned to counties and cities for general purposes, including frontline law enforcement. And also want to add that this budget proposes to repay the pre-2004 mandate debt of $765 million as well, to also help with general purpose activities at the local government level. So we do not think that this bill is necessary. In addition, the $1.5 billion additional general fund that would be provided to local governments on top of the money that has already been dedicated for these purposes would put the state into a deficit and could not be supported ongoing.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler. Elio?
Drew Soderborg, Legislative Analyst's Office. We don't have any specific comments on the bill, but are happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
Thank you. So colleagues, Senator Stone, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it quick. We've talked about this in our Public Safety Committee with the LAO, and I asked the LAO specifically how much of money sent to counties is actually commensurate with the cost of them assuming the responsibilities for AB 109. And if I remember correctly, the cost was basically giving the county 70 cents on the dollar. Are you still taking that position that we're only receiving counties are only receiving 70% of the money that it costs them to implement the program?
Jessica Peters with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We have spent some time looking into this issue over the past couple of months, and what we found is that on a statewide basis, the total amount of funding for realignment seems roughly on target with what was projected. In terms of looking at workload for realignment, we would note that the data is fairly limited, but where there are certain data points available, the data does seem to indicate that workload is pretty much on target statewide with the amount of workload that was estimated at the time of realignment. But in some cases, it might actually be slightly lower. So on a statewide basis, again, based on somewhat limited data, but the best available data, it seems to indicate that overall statewide things are going roughly according to estimates at the time. Now, when you look at it on a county-by-county breakdown, there can be some differences where some counties may be experiencing more workload than what was initially estimated at the time of realignment, and some may be experiencing less. In addition, some counties may be receiving more funding than it was projected that they would need at the time of realignment, and some may be receiving less. Those differences county by county could have something to do with different local decisions. The counties do have a lot of control over how they choose to manage this population, and that's sort of the best available data we have at this time.
Very good. And with regard to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Senator.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so that you can say for the record that the workload expectations have been met that were expected, and that counties are made whole with respect to the cost to them with the realignment program, AB 109 in specific.
So, Senator Stone, the data that is available currently does not reflect counties' actual costs. That's not something that they report. We do have data on the number of offenders, for example, that are admitted to jail, the average daily population of offenders that are supervised in the community. And so we don't have data because it's not reported to the state that's comprehensive. There's, sort of some data points that indicate that workload appears to be, sort of in the ballpark of what was estimated at the time of realignment, and in some cases lower. But in terms of the actual cost to counties, they don't report that data, and so we wouldn't know what they're spending.
Okay, so then how did I get an answer a few months ago when I asked how much the counties were getting reimbursed, and I was told by the LAO that we're getting 70 cents on the dollar, and today you're telling me that you're pretty much made whole with certain exceptions in different counties?
We're unaware of how that information got to you. I don't believe it was from our office, but we could work with you to assess where that
I'd be happy
information came
to get
from.
a copy of the tape.
Definitely.
It was very specific.
We would definitely be happy to follow up with you on that. The only thing I'd like to add is that it does vary on a county-to-county basis. So there are counties who may be experiencing more workload than was expected, and some counties that are experiencing less than was expected. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that one of the things to think about when looking at the adequacy of the funding given to counties is the allocation formula. The allocation formula wasn't developed solely based on what expected county needs were. there were other variables that came in. So there could be some counties who are experiencing relatively high amounts of workload, and for whatever reason, those variables aren't, the variables used in the formula aren't resulting in a commensurate amount of funding being sent to them.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to ask. I can tell you that our sheriff, our county probation officer have estimated that we're getting 70 cents on the dollar. Maybe we're one of the counties is more burdened. It would be nice if there was a way in which we could get these actuarials back, and that if there is a deficiency, a delta, that the state would make sure that those counties are made whole. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stone. Clearly, we could be benefiting from a little bit more information, and I think Senator Wynn may have a solution to that.
Yeah, and, you know, and I Mr. Chairman and colleagues, I really appreciate allowing me to bring this up. You know, given that there's quite some lively discussions on we do want some more data, maybe I'm going to at this time then just make it a 2-year bill. And then that way, one, we're showing this and we'll end this now. And then I will come back again next year as we continue to work with LAO and the administration and local government to see where the numbers are and what's going on.
Fair enough. And to answer the question, colleagues, you may have, why is this in our budget committee tonight? It's because the Rules Committee sent it to us, so that's why we have it. Yes. So this, without objection, authors request that we make this a 2-year bill. We'll do that. Senator Roth?
Mr. Chair, I move local property taxes assessed value per the staff recommendation.
I'm sorry?
I just moved issue 15, local property taxes assessed value per the staff recommendation.
Okay, so we have a motion on issue 15. This then becomes an information item. The bill itself will become a 2-year bill. Don't want to cut anyone else off, but we're going to now return to issue 15 on page 19, and we have a motion by Senator Roth. Ms. Bosler, if you'd like to very briefly introduce it so we can move forward.
Just that our May revision did increase our revenue estimate of property taxes, reflecting the environment in the state. We do not agree with the LAO's assumptions and their revenue forecast at this time. The main difference is related to the estimates about redevelopment, and we feel comfortable with the estimates that we've made in that area.
Very good. And LAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
What do you think of your projections?
As Ms. Bosler indicated, we the primary area of disagreement between our property tax estimates is in the redevelopment numbers. But I think just to step back a little bit, overall, we're talking about a difference of about 0.5% overall between our two numbers. Not a really big difference. And there certainly is some uncertainty about the redevelopment numbers. Much of that uncertainty has to do with the governor's proposed trailer bill and the changes that might make to the dissolution process. And so there certainly is some room for those numbers to move around depending on the decisions that you make and what that bill looks like and how it's implemented. So there is some uncertainty there. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We do have a motion. Public comment? Seeing none, call the roll, please.
Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Nielsen? No. Nielsen, no. Allen? Allen, aye. Anderson? Anderson, no. Bell? Bell, aye. Block? Block, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. Monty? Morlock? Wynn? Penn? Aye. Penn, aye. Havley? Havley, aye. Roth? Roth, aye. Stone? Stone, no. Wolk? Wolk, aye. That's 10-3.
Motion passes 10-3. Moving on to page 20, issue 16, state taxes. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, as I've mentioned already at least once today, the May revision does assume $6.7 billion in additional revenues over the January budget. So there's a significant revision upward based on the revenue trends that we see and are built into our forecast for 2015-16. We do have a relatively small difference with the LAO related to budget year revenues, mainly related to capital gains and other volatile revenue sources that the state relies on. And so it is our preference to assume, continue to assume the level that was put forward in the May revision, because it's just very difficult to build new ongoing programs on revenues that may or may not come in. And so we continue to prefer our revenue estimate.
Understood. Thank you, Ms. Bosler. LAO, Mr. Sis.
Jason Sisney from the LAO. Want to thank the members for all of their comments throughout the day from both sides of the aisle. Senator Leno, Senator Stone, Senator Morlock have all made some excellent points, and for all members, we're available to provide information as you consider this important issue over the next few weeks. As I do every year, I want to communicate first, actually, my thanks for our staff who spend quite a bit of time working on these forecasts, as well as respect for our counterparts at the Department of Finance. They, like us, share the sometimes thankless job of coming up with estimates of California's revenues, economy, and capital gains every year with the full knowledge that they're all going to be wrong. The only questions are how much and in which direction. And these are things that we ultimately can't know in advance. Last year, our office's estimates of major tax revenues that we provided to you at this time for 2014-15 have been too low. They've been about $3.5 billion too low, the estimates that our office provided you about a year ago. Our estimates this year for the next fiscal year come to you using much the same method that we used last year that proved to be $3.5 billion too low. This year, our higher estimates for 15-16, like last year, assume a flat stock market for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, while it's very uncomfortable, there's no way to build a budget for the state of California without making some assumption about what the stock market is going to do, because our revenues are so tied to the fortunes of our highest income residents. So this year, we also, in the LAO forecast, assume much less growth in the state's important residential building sector than we did last year. And as such, if the stock market grows over the next year, like it did over the last year, and if we see more of a pop in residential building construction, which is what the Department of Finance's economic forecast says will happen, we think that the LAO revenue estimates for 15-16 could easily prove billions of dollars too low. On the other hand, if the stock market drops significantly later this year or early next year, that would be one scenario that would be more consistent with the governor's May revision revenue estimates. And that sort of stock market drop is certainly possible. But it does seem to us speculative to assume now that the stock market will drop in that manner over the rest of the year into next year, which it seems to us is essentially what the Department of Finance revenue estimates implicitly assume. There are a lot of uncertainties, too, about our complex accounting or accrual system, also about the revenues the state will take in just after the budget deadline in mid-June, much of which will be counted to the 14-15 fiscal year. And as a result, I do want to mention that it's entirely possible that our office's 14-15 revenue estimates will be hundreds of millions of dollars too low. So I think that the bottom line, as going to some of the conversations today, is that state revenues could be a few $billion above our office's estimates. They could be a few $1 billion lower. All of those scenarios are possible. There's no real way to project what's going to happen a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. Our budget formulas and our revenue system are so complicated that it's difficult enough to provide a forecast for the year ahead. The governor's budget seems to regard more pessimistic revenue estimates as a key financial safeguard to protect the state budget against future downturns. And there's certainly a lot of merit that can be ascribed to that approach. Those downturns are inevitable. It's very hard to predict when they're going to occur. On the other hand, if the legislature feels that the governor's revenue estimates are too pessimistic and adopts higher revenues, then we would advise the legislature to focus on how much to build larger reserves, and if it wishes to adopt more of a mix of short-term or one-time spending commitments as opposed to ongoing budget commitments. So no matter which revenue estimate is adopted, you need to think about what are the options to deal with the downturn, which is inevitable, and we don't know when it'll occur. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sisney. So if I heard you correctly, looking at revenues relative to projections of the past couple of years, we might assume revenue $3.5 billion higher than yours, but if we want to be on the conservative side, we might go with your projection.
Well, I think that's possible. One word that's been thrown around today is speculative. We're already seeing 2015 tax income come in. Oh, we have that beginning in April. In fact, some of that will implicitly go to 2015-16 under our complicated rules. Year over year, for quarterly estimated payments, which drive capital gains, they were up 17% in April compared to last year. That's not last year's taxable income. That's this year's taxable income. Our forecast assumes much less growth than that over the rest of the year as a consequence of assuming a flat stock market. If the stock market continues to grow, then that's the scenario in which the revenues, I think, could easily be billions of dollars above our estimates. On the other hand, they could be below too.
I just want to clarify one thing, because I think that it makes it sound like we have the exact same models and we input the same things in and different things come out, and that's not the case. We have two very different models. Our model has considerable detail, and it does come out with a different revenue estimate than the LAOs. But the economic factors that are going in are slightly different. But there isn't. We have worked with them for the last several years to really reconcile that capital gains piece, that very volatile income in the personal income tax category, and we don't have a complete understanding of why we have these differences. These differences do occur. But I think that to imply that the administration is somewhat being pessimistic, I think is unfair. Our estimates are the best estimates that we have based on the data. We have a complicated revenue model, as does the LAO, and we do our best shot at what we think is going to be the revenues. So that just wanted to make that point.
Fair enough. Ms. Bosler, I would not call your projections pessimistic, but I would call them conservative, and for good purposes. Senator Bell and then Senator Nielsen.
Just dialogue here. There are two different efforts. They're based on different models. That's great. Okay, I'll listen to you. You don't have to kind of do all that speculative or conservative, all that stuff. Just, we don't need that. But anyway, Silicon Valley, out of 250 CEOs, 215 said they're hiring next year. So, and 5 says they're not hiring, and they're reducing employment. So it's 215 to 5 right now. On the other hand, California, we have the drought, and the agriculture economy that could be an impact. So we have some real issues that we have to kind of maintain a certain amount of caution about. Because I think in our area, I think things are going to be good. In other areas, not so good. How does that affect your projections? You're looking at those types.
Yeah.
Definitely, the economic factors are one of many inputs into the model. So absolutely, we're looking at the overall economy and how that will feed into the revenue model.
I think that we've spoken in recent weeks about the effects of the drought. The drought is having a significant impact on certain communities. We talked about the effects in East Porterville in subcommittee the other day. And I think that while that is the case, as a share of our overall economy, our agricultural sector is actually quite small. So looking at the history, even assuming the drought worsens, which is certainly a possibility, likely would have a very small impact on the things we're talking about here, the statewide tax dollars. With regard to the other points you made, one of the points that we made in our analyses this month is that California, our capital gains and the personal income tax dollars that we receive really have become increasingly dependent on the success of our Bay Area technology industries. And so I think that the continued success of those industries is one of the things that the state very much needs to happen. If the tech industry were to have a stumble or to have a severe setback in the next few years, that certainly would be of significant concern, obviously, to the state's revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Sisney. We're going to hear from Senator Nielsen, public comment, and then we're going to ask for a motion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't think I'd call the governor's, I don't want to call him conservative, but I would say restrained. And I would argue in these volatile times that maybe restraint is a better way to start off with. And one of my biggest arguments in that regard is it's been a long, hard climb back to where we're at today. And I think that's just too tenuous for us to make glorious assumptions and then spend it, because it's very difficult to roll that clock back to unspend it. It's almost impossible around here. So I would argue restraint and not generosity.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Senator Roth.
I move the staff recommendation, if this is the appropriate point.
Thank you, which is to adopt the LAO General Fund major revenues in the 15-16 budget.
Yes, sir.
Call the roll, please.
Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Nielsen? Nielsen, no. Allen? Allen, aye. Anderson? Anderson, no. Bell? Bell, aye. Block? Block, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. Monning? Morlock? Wynn? Pan? Pan, aye. Pavley? Pavley, aye. Roth? Roth, aye. Stone? Stone, no. Wolk? Wolk, aye. 10-3.
Measure passes 10-3.